personal interest.
Mr. President, gentlemen of the Senate, if I can get your attention just a moment. And I told the senator from Pickens as we went in session today that I was going to do this. And I would ask for your attention. And if he raises the point on me, I may lose all my religion standing here today. I will say to you that before I start, that this is not a three-peat on the front row on this side before y'all get anxious over here. Is not where I'm going. So I want to make that real clear to you. And I'm privileged to have two of my daughters here today and my son-in-law. My wife is with one of our grandchildren. This is probably one of the hardest things I've ever done in this Senate because it is so personal and it's something you normally would not talk about in public. We in public service try to maintain some semblance of privacy in our private lives. And I've been blessed more than I can ever imagine in life. God has been good to me. But my life has changed. And I will say to you that I am here today. I am who I am by the grace of God. And I would say to you that I stand before you by the grace of God. Because God has walked with me in the last year. And there are only probably 25 people in the world who know what I'm getting ready to talk with you about. I've had the privilege of serving in this body, and one of the great privileges of serving in public service is getting to meet preachers. And I'm sure all of you have met preachers and visited in churches, and I've been very blessed, not only with a family and friends, but preachers that I've gotten very close to. And they've been very close to me in the last year. One of them or two of them are in here. Chaplain has been with me through my walk in the last year. Tommy McGill has been with me. Steve Cloud, a preacher in Chapin named Don Brock, Rocky Purvis at Northside Baptist Church, and Reverend Charles Jackson at Brooklyn Baptist, and Lonnie Shull, who is a retired preacher. Without them and without the grace of God, I could not have gone through what I've been through in the last year. And I really never intended to talk about it. And I didn't want to talk about it, but I will tell you that what I've been through, God has called me in the last 3 months to talk about, and talk about publicly. And I've been saved by His grace, and I'm thankful for that. Last year in the legislative session, some of you, and nobody in this chamber other than Chaplain, I think, and maybe one other, no member of this chamber, knows what I'm getting ready to talk about. But we have a need in this state, we have a need in this country, and we have a need in this world. And that is that we need to talk about it publicly when we have an opportunity. And as one preacher said 2 weeks ago, God shines the light, but when you receive the light, you take the light and you share it. And I've not been able to shake it, so therefore I wanted to talk about it publicly, because we have things like women's breast cancer, which women did not want to talk about. And I understand why they didn't want to talk about it. Frankly, I didn't want to talk about my situation publicly. But because women talked about breast cancer, we have made great strides in what goes on. But last year, in this state, we need a public awareness. We have issues in public health. And one of those, and this happens to be a body of all males, which I really didn't think about till I got up here today. But we as males have a similar disease that strikes us, and that is prostate cancer. And those of us who have ever had to deal with that don't want to talk about it. And I will tell you that last year in the legislative session, I went from December of 2010 to a recommendation that my PSA was elevated to a biopsy which was not positive but suspicious, to a second biopsy, and I received a call on April 18th of last year that I had been diagnosed with prostate cancer. That's the last thing I would want anybody to know. It changes your world instantly. It affects you emotionally, it affects you physically, it affects you mentally, and it affects you spiritually. And thank God to God for what He did for me. My diagnosis was very low grade, thank goodness, and very early. And this is about 3 weeks before we went through the Amazon battle that we had here. I, like women who suffer from breast cancer and other men who have prostate cancer, was scared to death. I'll tell you that. But my faith got stronger. I will also tell you that I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want anybody to know about it. And to the credit of former Senator Linda Short, she never said anything, because I walked in a doctor's office in Charleston at MUSC, and there sat Senator Short. And I think she figured out something was wrong at the end of last year. And so you don't want to talk about it. You don't want anybody to know about it, because it's a very private, personal matter. And that's the way I intended it to leave it until December. But my story is one that you need knowledge, you need education, and we need to address it publicly, the problem that we as men face. 1 out of 6 men in this world will be diagnosed with prostate cancer. 250,000 men in 2012 will be diagnosed with it, and 28,000 will die. It is called the silent killer. I was fortunate, and I will say to you again that I am here today by the grace of God, because when I was diagnosed and found out, I spent considerable time going up and down the road to Charleston and the assistance of Ray Greenberg and doctors at MUSC, of learning what the options were for those people who face it. I was also blessed through a preacher to get to a preacher in Chapin, South Carolina, who had been to the Global Robotic Institute in Celebration, Florida. And for those of you of faith, Celebration brought home to me this extra special meaning of where I could be treated. And I explored all the options that were there. And I would say to you that the last day of July of 2011, I drove with my wife and 2 of my daughters to Celebration outside of Orlando, and on Monday morning, August the 1st, I had robotic surgery to remove my prostate. And I have, 1 week later, as I was called to go on the trip to wherever you went, I drove back to Columbia, and the following Tuesday morning I went to work I was in the hospital one night. I had not been in the hospital in 58 years. I took my health for granted. When they removed my prostate, the test showed it was exactly as they said earlier, that it was low grade and that it was early stage, and they got all of it. I am fine. I want to say that one more time. I've had all my tests since. I am fine. It had not spread beyond my prostate. And so I am here today to say to you that with God's help, you can get through it. But I would also say to you that if you are not taking a PSA exam, you need to take a PSA exam. And I would say to you that if you receive a diagnosis, and I'm sure there are people who are here that may be in that stage, go have it seen about early. It is a silent killer, but if in fact you address it, and you address it early and aggressively, you will be fine. I am here because God walked with me and gave strength, knowledge, and skill to the doctors. I chose to go there because the gentleman who did mine had done 5,000 robotic surgeries, more than anybody else in the world. And the last thing I wanted to do was stand here and share this with you today, because my real goal was to never mention it, because you would not known it. It's probably the hardest thing I've ever done besides bury two of my parents, is to stand here with you, my colleagues, and share this with you publicly. But I will say to you that I've been called to do that, and I'm going to answer that call from God to talk about it publicly. And I did not want you, who are my colleagues, and the people who work here that I've spent a number of years working with, to hear it on the street. I wanted you to hear it from me, because I have agreed to accept a position on an International Prostate Cancer Foundation as a board member, and to speak at an international conference this Saturday evening in Orlando, Florida, about my experience as a patient. But what I want you to know is that you don't walk that walk alone. Secondly, don't ignore it. And third, go get treatment quickly and aggressively. And if you ever, I talked last night for 15 minutes with a gentleman here in Columbia, because I've got a calling to help people who many of you know has been recently diagnosed. And I called him last night and talked with him about 15 minutes. It makes a difference to know that people care, and they'll walk that walk with you and God as you go through it. I would ask you, as you go forward, help me be an advocate for screening, for education, for treatment of prostate cancer. And I hope, if there's nothing else that I do in this world, that you learn that it's okay to publicly talk about it. As difficult as it is, and as much as you don't want to do it, as I didn't want to do it, that you talk about it publicly. Because it will kill you, but it's okay. You will survive. God will walk you through it. Thank you.
Senate will stand at ease momentarily. Senator from Lexington, what purpose do you rise?
Mr. President, unanimous consent to have the Senator from Lexington's remark printed in journal.